Finally, the news is starting to talk about it. Major federal budget issues. What's on the table is the federal government running out of money on January 19th. If this happens, jobs are on a holding pattern.
NBC News has obtained internal FAA documents first reported by the New York Times, detailing controllers' own anonymous reporting of mistakes and exhaustion.
On top of a major shortage, this is going to make for a huge problem, huge issues, and flying may become a whole new thing.
And we've heard about near misses in the sky. We've heard about near misses on the ground. We've heard about near misses with planes about to land. Having to pull up quickly because they were about to run into another plane on the ground on the runway.
And might come with a lot more risk circling your mind before you jump on the plane. Things are already bad with this and about to get much worse. More important stuff you guys should be aware of coming right up. My name is Cohen here at Riverside Homestead, and if you're brand new here, welcome. If you guys are into prepping tips, emergency preparedness, and most of all, news and awareness, stuff that you want to know about, be sure to hit that notification bell so you guys can stay up to date. Let's jump into this one.
About near misses in the sky. We've heard about near misses on the ground. We've heard about near misses with planes about to land. Having to pull up quickly because they were about to run into another plane on the ground on the runway.
A runway incursion, yeah.
Yeah, so, and now we're understanding why this is happening.
Well, it could be part of it.
So over this last month, New York Times did a crazy piece on the shortage of air traffic controllers. And now to top that off, we have funding problems with the federal government. Traveling and flying may change as we know it. Now, don't you find this very interesting? We've got this massive shortage, right? And then now we're gonna have some federal issues coming into play. But did we hear about any of this during the holidays when everyone was traveling like crazy? This is why we pay attention and aware. Now, before we get to some of these other issues that you guys may not be aware of, including this.
A troubling investigation published by the New York Times spotlighting the nation's overworked air traffic controllers, including some who claim their colleagues used drugs and alcohol while on the job. In a moment, we're going to speak with one of the reporters on the story, but
something to consider next time you hop onto a plane, right? But before we dive into that, stuff that's been kind of circulating in this last 30 days due to a huge report that came out, and I'm going to go over that with you. Let's touch real quick on something that just came out in the news that adds to the mess. It also says transportation isn't the only agency at risk if there's a shutdown. Military construction, veterans affairs, housing, and energy department would also be affected too. The rest of the federal government remain funded until February 2nd. Running out of money January 19th. What's going to happen? On top of it all, new in the news, looming federal shutdown would impact air traffic controllers amid ongoing staffing shortage. Now, like I said, there's already a huge problem you guys might not be aware of. This adds to the problem. This just came out January 3rd, Washington. The busy holiday travel season may be over, but now aviation officials are facing some new turbulence. Not new. They just didn't want to tell you while you guys were all traveling. Federal government could run out of transportation funding in less than 3 weeks. And that means there could be more disruptions. Currently, there are almost 11,000 air traffic controllers nationwide. They guide pilots through takeoff and landing and manage planes coming into and out of airspace. Trust me, we need these guys in abundance and they need to be at the top of their game. Getting in a plane wreck isn't quite the same as a car fender bumper. January 19th. The federal government runs out of money on January 19th. Their jobs would be in a holding pattern. In quotes, the idea that you would expect them to go do a stressful, demanding job, to sit in those towers, in those centers, not getting paid with all the added stress is unacceptable. And that was said by the U.S. Secretary of Department of Transportation. And what they say is true. These guys are already tapped out. They're definitely not going to go work for free. There's also a shortage of these workers. Transportation Secretary Buttigieg wants to hire 1,800 new controllers this year alone, but he warns a shutdown would would ground those efforts. Sounds like there's a solve. Just add 1,800 more workers and we're good. They don't tell you the part that it takes 3 years to train these individuals. We'll get into that. In quotes, we need to be doing more, not less, with hiring controllers, with training them, and with the technology and equipment that they need to do their job, said Buttigieg. It also says transportation isn't the only agency at risk if there's a shutdown. Military construction, Veterans Affairs, Housing, and Energy Department would also be affected too. The rest of the federal government remain funded until February 2nd. Running out of money January 19th. What's going to happen? Big question that's turning in a lot of your minds. How are we going to fix this problem if we're already 34 trillion in debt, which is a record? For those of you that aren't up to date on that, real quick injection here.
The nation's debt stands at about $33.8 trillion. That's about 124% of the country's GDP. The government can only really raise taxes and cut spending. But is that enough to get a handle on the debt? Lawmakers are working on it. Some are calling on a commission to come up with realistic ways to approach it. Last week, we spoke to Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's, about the ballooning debt, and this is what he had to say.
It's a big problem because debt plus higher rates means higher interest payments. Here's a factoid for you. We're going to be paying soon more in interest expense on our debt than we do to fund our defense budget. I mean, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so we've got to make some changes. And, if you look at current law, if we make no changes in tax policy or spending policy, it's just unsustainable. Our debt load is going to rise to a place where the interest rates are going to rise. The economy is going to cave under the weight of all of that. So we've got to make some changes.
And that's where a lot of folks go to get that type of information, Moody's. And he said it just right. The way that they're going to auto fix this, rates are going to go through the roof. Things are going to get more expensive. Inflation is going to turn into hyperinflation. Thought you saw some food inflation already? Nope, that's going to continue to go up. And they're going to have to cut funding. And just real quick, how might that affect you? A community member wrote in and painted a picture of what that might look like. So let's be objective here. U.S. national debt record at $34 trillion and Congress gears up for a funding fight. So let's be objective here. What happens if they cut Social Security payments? By the way, this is the top 10 right here. What happens if they cut medical payments more? And they've already been doing this for years anyway. Number 3, what will happen if they cut federal payments to hospitals around the country? Number 4, what will happen when cities, mostly large ones, stop receiving additional federal aid? Number 5, what happens when the food stamps get cut? 6, what happens when the HUD, Section 8 housing, gets cut? Number 7, what happens when the federal student loan gets cut? Number 8, what happens when military budget gets cut? 9, what happens when other federal government programs like FEMA aid gets cut? And number 10, what happens when federal government stops paying the regularly course of business vendors and businesses who do business with the federal government? In conclusion, so will any of these areas be affected, or will the federal government just simply continue to print, borrow until the house collapses? Valid points, well put, things that we need to consider. Now back to the topic of air traffic control. First, let me show you why it's so difficult to get more people in the position real quick.
As the staffing challenges are harder to overcome because of the FAA's age requirements for applicants. The FAA currently only accepts applications once a year in a 3-day window. To apply, you must be younger than 31 years old, and if you're hired, the FAA requires you to either retire at 56 to prevent burnout or apply for a waiver. Is that a good rule?
Probably not if you're one of the places that has a shortage of controllers.
As for his recent graduates,
Southwest 1308, hold short, runway 28 right.
Kyle Rutkowski and Najma Jaima are among the tens of thousands who applied in the FAA's 3-day window back in May. The FAA says the application process can take 6 months or longer, even for applicants who've already studied air traffic control.
I think they could probably make the application process a little quicker. It's really difficult to kind of just sit there and basically just waiting for them to contact you.
And a cluster of near collisions earlier this year at several airports, including one at JFK, put an even brighter spotlight on this issue. Buttigieg recently said the level of severe runway incursions appears to be going down after that increase and is coming, quote, closer to the norm. Tim McNicholas, CBS 2 News.
So, is it really, and this is a big buzz on TikToker and all the social media platforms, is this a bad time to fly? Should you even be getting onto the plane? Now, you guys could look it up. There's numerous articles that are talking about staffing shortages, near misses on planes, even in Sacramento or I think out in California. One was only 100 feet from the other, and it's getting worse. It's already out in reports that multiple planes almost hit each other weekly. Look at this. Did you know a government audit released in June found that 77% of critical air traffic control facilities in the US are staffed below the recommended threshold? It's no joke. This is a serious concern. So like I said, getting this back up and running is not going to happen overnight. We already have a problem. The problem's going to get much worse, especially when they only hire during a very small section of time. You have to meet an age requirement. It takes 6 months for them to get back to you. And then supposedly your training takes 3 years. So we're not going to see the demand that we need. Now, like I said, New York Times did a fabulous piece on this. Let me give you guys the gist as this reporter interviews the author.
That's a terrifying headline. It's a terrifying story. Tell us a little bit more about what you and your colleagues found.
Yeah, it is. So this investigation actually started almost a year ago. You might remember that there was sort of the Southwest meltdown. A lot of things were happening. It was becoming very annoying to fly. Thousands of passengers were stranded all the time. And we started looking into this, and then, all these close calls started happening, and we wondered, why is this happening? And through our reporting and through lots of documents, we talked to more than 70 people, including current air traffic controllers. What we found was that these close calls are happening on average multiple times a week, and a big part of it is air traffic controllers are just overworked, they're fatigued, they're demoralized. Everything is just very, very understaffed.
Sydney, is it a problem of there just aren't enough trained air traffic controllers? And so what is the government doing to try to remedy that?
Yeah, I mean, that is the problem. Our reporting found that 99% of air traffic facilities in the United States are understaffed. I think one of the biggest issues is we haven't had a crash. Fortunately, there hasn't been a collision in, a long, long time. So there's a lot of, what is to be done. It looks really safe. The FAA has a budget, just like all federal agencies. And, there's just this understaffing is pervasive. But the problem is this understaffing, dates back to the 1980s. And the government hasn't really kept pace with these wave of retirements that have been happening. And so they're just in this really big hole right now.
So that's the big picture solution, is that the staffing issues. But in the short term, as your story indicates, some of these air traffic controllers dealing with the stress are turning to drugs or to alcohol. What is being done in the short term is there anything being done in the short term to try to crack down on those poor choices that endanger passengers?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question. I think the controllers that we talk to say that they're very demoralized, they're very stressed, they're overworked. They're working 6 days a week, 10-hour days, and they actually do say there's really not enough support, that the FAA isn't doing enough, and that, things are reaching a crisis level. A lot of people tell us that they're really afraid that a crash is inevitable at this point because everyone is just so overworked.
At this point in time, a crash is inevitable. Now, like she said, FFA, not really putting as much attention to this as they should. Now, could this be because old Blacker Rocker and old Vanguarder are at the top and own all of these airlines? Well, slowing the roll on flights would definitely be a financial impact. And I'm sure the old FFFA is probably in their pocketbook too. Big question is, how is this going to get fixed? Because I don't see any immediate solution to this huge problem anytime soon with how long the process takes. To top that off, you got federal government funding possibly on the chopping block January 19th. Please share this out. If you know anybody that flies, this is probably something they should know. Please share this out. Let me know down in the comments what you're gathering from this and where you see this going. Definitely some good information you guys should be aware of. Got a lot more coming this week. Keep prepping, keep learning, keep doing. We'll see you on the next one.